Hello everyone, this is Pushpavalli. I'm a biology educator with an expertise in curriculum design. Today I'll be walking you through a concept called the backward design. What makes this presentation unique is that I'm not just going to tell you what backward design is. A simple GPT prompt or a Wikipedia or a Google search can tell you what a backward design is in a matter of minutes. But I'm going to demonstrate how a backward design can be used to plan and deliver a lesson. I've chosen the concept of addiction to demonstrate backward design, and my audience, the target audience, is grade 12 students. Let me start by asking this question. How many of you have planned a lesson and then delivered it? It could be to a classroom of students, it could be to your siblings, it could be to your own daughter or son or your partners, it could be to anyone. Now let me ask you the next question. If you've planned the lesson, what was the first thing that you asked yourself? What was the first step of your plan? I'll let you think for a minute. Well, if your answer is you have planned what to teach or the content, I'm very sorry to say that you've put the cart before the horse, and it's not a very happy situation there. So, let's see what this backward design talks about. This backward design is going to flip the traditional model, and this is going to be a 3-staged model. The stage 1 of backward design is identifying learning outcomes. Identifying learning outcomes. The second stage of this design is determining acceptable evidence. Determine acceptable evidence. Stage 3 of this design is planning learning experience. Now let's look at each of this in detail. Step 1 talks about intended learning outcomes. A learning outcome for a chapter can be acquisition of a knowledge, or it can be developing a skill or an attitude. We are far beyond the point in education where learning outcome is remembering something or recalling a particular piece of information. I'm sometimes trying to deliver a skill. I'm sometimes trying to improve the class's attitude towards something. This is the first thing that we need to design when you start designing a lesson. But keep in mind that we need not address all these 3 domains equally in all the subjects. For example, let's take a demonstration of my topic. I am intending to teach the concept called addiction. Under the knowledge domain, I would like the students to know what addiction is, basically to define it, and I'd like them to understand the physiobiology behind it. What is the biology behind it? What's happening in the brain? How is it reflecting out? In case of attitude, I would like them to develop a sense of empathy towards the disorder called addiction. I'd like them to lose any sense of judgment or their preformed judgments, their preformed notion regarding what addiction is. I'd also like them to develop a sense of awareness towards this issue. Now, since my audience is 12th grade CBSE or an international board student, a school student may not have enough skills to address the problem of addiction, give counseling, or give medical intervention to a person who has this problem of addiction. So my topic here does not address this entity called skill, and that is not a problem. I mean, this is not a hard and fast rule. This is not a checklist that we had to check. This is just broad domains under which I can classify the learning outcome. Now that I've defined my intended learning outcome, I've set a goal. I've set a goal for myself, and I've set a goal for my learners to know to know what addiction is, to know what they're working towards in the next class or in the next upcoming classes. The second stage in the backward design is determining acceptable evidence. Determining acceptable evidence. And this is where the important part of tests or assessments come in. Now, when I say a test, the most common image that pops up in our mind is a pen and a paper test. But this, in 2025, this is outdated. Or rather, it does not address the 21st century skills that we are trying to impart to the learners. So, what is assessment? Is there a hard and fast rule for how an assessment should look like? Actually, there is no rule for how an assessment should look like. If you remember, we had 3 different learning outcomes: knowledge, skill, and attitude. A pen and paper test may be valid only to test the knowledge of a particular subject, only probably to test how well the student has understood a particular concept, the theory behind the particular concept. But this is not the only way to test knowledge. Knowledge could be tested by a pen paper test. It could be tested by the student's ability to create schema, to create mental map, a representation. This tells us how well the student has integrated the knowledge to the previously existing knowledge. They are not just reading isolated facts, but they are developing what they already know. Or it could be an analysis of case study. This talks about the transfer of knowledge. In a minute, I'll relate all this. I'll demonstrate this in my case in the case that I've chosen, addiction, which will make things much clearer. If I have to test a skill, I may ask the students to perform the skill. If I'm a music teacher, if I'm trying to test if they've got a certain note right, I'll make them sing a song. I'll make them sing the particular note to test if they've got that skill. If I'm teaching someone how to design a table, if I'm teaching someone how to sew, and if I've taught them a stitch, I don't want them to tell me how the stitch looks like. I would rather want them to do the stitch and see. So that is skill. This is one of a very straightforward way to test it, is to see if they're able to do it. Attitude, well, this is a little harder to test. This is a little abstract. So we can test it by asking them to write a reflection on a particular topic, or it can be a discussion, a guided discussion. Now let's see a demonstration of determining acceptable evidence in the case that I've chosen, that is the drug addiction. To see if the student has acquired enough skills, to see if the student has acquired enough knowledge regarding addiction, I would sorry. I'd probably ask the student to start with, I can ask them to take a low stake pen paper test, asking them to define addiction, asking them the neural pathways that are activated during addiction, or asking them the reason behind a particular behavior in addiction. Now, if you see, the knowledge should be tested at multiple levels. It should be tested at the basic level of being able to recall, of being able to remember. And then the intermediate level of being able to connect or synthesize multiple concepts that they have studied. And in the advanced stage, the student should be able to evaluate the problem. They are probably given a case study here, and they are asked to evaluate to reason behind the events that have been explained in the case study. This case study could explain someone having a severe withdrawal symptom as a result of addiction. The connecting and synthesizing, it could be regarding the 4 different parts of the brain that are involved in addiction. It could be a learner may be asked to explain how these four parts are interconnected to each other. In case of recalling and remembering, the learner may just be asked to define addiction, define tolerance, define withdrawal, define dependence, or what is this, what is that, the difference between dependence and tolerance, right? So this is how we test the knowledge of a student in various levels. And when I have to design a test to test if the attitude has developed, I can give them the statistical data of the recent trend in drug addiction. And I can see the response that I generate from the students. How do they look at it? Do they look at it as a problem that they could address? What are the solutions that they come up with? Have they developed the sense of empathy towards the problem? Have they developed a sense of awareness towards this issue? Have they understood the gravity of the situation? These are some of the attitudes that I could test for. And this could be done by guided discussion, where I could probably play a video of a person suffering from severe withdrawal and generate reflection from the student. Ask the students to reflect on this video. I could play a video of a young student dealing drugs, a young student buying drug from another dealer, and ask them to write what they feel. Ask them to write about what pushed the student to deal drugs, what pushed the student to continue dealing drugs, all that. Now, these are some of my acceptable evidence. Well, this cannot arise out of thin air. I cannot expect the student to do all this without giving them the enough knowledge, without imparting them the enough content. So with all this in mind, I'm going to design my learning experience. I'm going to design the learning experience. Planning, learning experience. How am I going to address all this? Now, I can start by defining addiction? Addiction is basically defined in three parts. It's a chronic disorder. It's a chronic disorder. It's a compulsive behavior. Compulsive behavior. It is a compulsive behavior despite having negative consequences. Now, I'd like to pause here a minute and highlight how all these three could have been put in one single sentence. Rather, I've chosen to chunk the information. Now, chunking the information helps the students to organize the information better. As I'm saying this, the learner is creating a mental picture of the various aspects of addiction. And I could explain an animal model to drive this point home. I can explain the animal model of a mouse being fed with a food, probably a block of cheese or some cracker, a piece of cracker fed to it, and the mouse happily eats it. I condition the mouse by probably there is a bell here. Whenever the mouse runs past the bell, it gets the cracker or it gets the cheese. In the next phase, in the next part, what I do is the mouse, the bell, as it runs past the bell, it's going to receive a mild shock. The mouse withdraws. It does not go to the cracker or the cheese. Cracker or the cheese. Now, although this cracker or cheese is something the mouse is attracted to, because of this shock, because of this mild shock, the mouse withdraws. Now, if I replace the food or the cracker or the cheese with an addictive drug, and I follow the same step, I have the mouse, I have the drug, I feed the mouse with the drug continuously, I get the mouse addicted to the drug. Now I pair the mouse, the drug with a bell. Next, I pair the bell with an electric shock. Now, I want you to pause this video for a minute and recollect what we just saw in the earlier case and try to guess what the mouse would do. Yeah, you thought about it? Yes. The mouse is supposed to withdraw since it received a shock. But despite this electric shock, the mouse reaches out for the drug. Now this shows how this is a compulsive behavior. This is a compulsive behavior, albeit a negative consequence. I'd like to pause here for a minute and see what I've just demonstrated. Now, I've not only explained to them what addiction is, I've given to them an example. This makes the students form a mental representation. They are encoding the information. When a particular definition is followed by an example, the encoding is much deeper. The deeper is the encoding, the better is their retaining. They retain the information much better. Right? Now, I'm basically focusing here on organizing the information. I'm focusing on not just giving a one-line definition and asking the learner to memorize the definition. I'm rather giving the learner a picture of what addiction looks like. Moving on with addiction. Now, to understand what's actually happening in the brain, what is actually happening in the brain of the mouse or of someone who's addicted to a drug or to a behavior, what is happening in the brain? Now, imagine a situation where you work hard, really hard to something. You work hard for a test, and at the end of the day, you take the test and the test results come out. You are in the top 5% of the class, which is a really good thing. You feel a sense of award. You feel a sense of appreciation. Now, this reward that you've just received, activates a part of your brain called VTA. That is the ventral tegmental area. This VTA is basically going to activate the dopamine secretion. We have already discussed dopamine as a neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter, as the name suggests, it's transmitting information from one neuron to the other neuron across the space between it. Now, this dopamine is going to activate multiple parts of the brain. It affects amygdala. It's going to affect the cortex, the cortical region, prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex. It also activates the hippocampus and the nucleus accumbens. All these may seem too much to remember. All these may seem like Greek and Latin, so hard to remember. But when we look at the functions, it's going to be much simpler. Amygdala is basically the emotional brain. Prefrontal cortex is the reasoning brain. Hippocampus is the memory brain. Nucleus accumbens is the motivational brain. Now let's go back to the same instance of me writing a test and coming in the first top 5% of my class. Amygdala makes me feel happy. It makes me feel a sense of achievement. Happy. I have achieved something. I've graduated. I've done something. The prefrontal cortex is going to reason. It is going to pay more attention to the details. Now that I've come in the top 5% of the class, what did I do right? Did I study in the mornings? Did I study in the night? Did I write more? Did I write more tests? Did I practice more? What did I do? Memory. The hippocampus is going to register the details of the events. Details of the event. I probably had a journal where I wrote down what I'm writing, where I planned my events. So how did I plan? How did I do what I did? Where did I do it? Where did I go and write the exam? Where did I sit and prepare for? What are the resources that I used? These are the details of the events. And when I graduated in the top 5%, when I came out in the top 5% of the class, what did I do? How did I celebrate? How did my parents react? How did my friends react? All these. Now, this nucleus accumbens, as a result of all this, is going to motivate you. It's going to push you to do more of the same thing, because all of this is because of this dopamine hit. Now, if the same thing is considered in a drug addict, same thing in drug addict, when someone consumes the drug, there is an emotion of euphoria. There is a euphoric emotion. The sense of being lost, sense of being revealed, the sense of being relieved of all the problems, a very temporary sense of euphoria. This sense of euphoria is captured by the hippocampus. Can you pause a minute and think of what hippocampus just did? Think you've got it right. Hippocampus is registering the memory. It is registering the memory of what is this drug that is making me feel this good? Where is this drug? Where am I consuming this drug? Where am I obtaining this drug from? Who is with me when I'm taking this drug? What is my environment? What is the context in which I've taken the drug? All this. And my prefrontal cortex is registering the details. How much drug did I take? All these details of the event. Finally, the nucleus accumbens is going to push. It's going to push the person to take more drugs, to consume more drugs in this situation. Now, the same thing can be replicated for addictive behavior. What do I mean by an addictive behavior? By an addictive behavior, I mean gambling or shopping or involving in something that is self-inflictory. It could be anything. But the pathway that is activated is the same. Now, I know it was a little longer than intended, but let's pause for a minute and let's see the pedagogical tools that I've employed here. First thing is that I did not dump the information in paragraphs and essay to the learner. I've rather given the information in terms of a flow chart. And if you see, I've activated the prior knowledge here. I activated the prior knowledge, asking them, see what you've studied earlier is being relevant here. And when you immediately entail what's being taught, the theory, with an example from real life, this is scaffolding. This scaffolding of explaining the practical application of what they've just taught makes it remember much, much easier. Now, I'm asking them to transfer the knowledge that they've obtained just now. Transfer the knowledge in a different context. The real world application is how we drive a point home. Without real world application, this becomes the concept becomes abstract. The concept becomes abstract. Now that we have discussed the application of the pedagogical application of what I've just taught, let us look at some more information of addiction and how it can be taught. All I'm looking at right now, just to remind you, is how a mental map is created in the learner's mind, how to make sure a strong mental map is created, how to encode the knowledge. See, as we engage, as we use more visual stimulus on screen, as we use more visual stimuli, we are making the encoding better. See, what the learner sees is just a sensory stimuli. Sensory stimuli. It's what they see, what they hear. This is going to be a very short period. This is transferred to short-term memory where they're thinking about this. This is called the working memory. When I'm talking about this example here, when I'm talking about the example of how this pathway is activated, the student is probably thinking about their own achievement, something that they've done, something that made them feel good. They probably went out with their friends last night. They probably went out with their family on a trip last month. They're thinking about the events of the trip or the night out they had, and they're trying to use it in their own context. This is the short-term memory. To push the short-term memory into the long-term memory, we need to integrate their information. We need to integrate it with their previously existing knowledge, their previously existing schema. We need to integrate it with that. Unless we do it, it's only going to be in the short-term memory, which lasts for a few seconds at best. Right? Now we have seen how to organize information and how to integrate information. Now the last thing that we need to plan last thing that we need to incorporate in a lesson plan is how the student retains knowledge. As much as we emphasize on a skill or an attitude, without the knowledge of the subject, either of those are not going to help much. So the student is expected to retain at least the fundamental data for any subject. How do we retain it? We can have multiple retaining practices. One retaining practice could be the two-thing rule. Two things. At the end of this lecture, I can ask the students to write down any two things that they remember about addiction. It could be the definition of addiction, and it could talk about the pathway that it activates, or anything that they remember. Any two things that they remember about this concept of addiction. I can ask them to write about, there's a concept called spaced practice, where I can ask them the 3-2-1 rule. I can ask them to write 3 things that they remember about yesterday's class, 2 things that they remember about last week's class, and 1 thing that they remember from the previous semester. Now, it is very important to keep the context limited. If not for that, the students may get lost. So we try to make this related to addiction. I ask them to write any 3 things from yesterday's class that they could resonate, that they could relate to today's concept, 2 and 1. We can have elaborative encoding. I can ask the students to create a mind map or mnemonic to help them remember much better. Now, these are the ways in which I would design a pedagogy. In this limited time, I've demonstrated a small part of what backward design is. Of course, each of this could be dealt much more in detail. To keep the video short, I've just done this. So what I've done in this class is I've basically demonstrated how to design and implement a lesson using backward design, where we start with the intended learning outcomes, and then we determine the acceptable evidence, And then finally, we plan learning experience. When we plan learning experience, I focused more on how do we integrate the knowledge to previously existing knowledge, and how we how can we help the students retain the knowledge much better, which was dealt in the last section using all these things. And how are we going to help the students transfer the knowledge to other domains. The material that's going to be used in class should also be carefully designed using a perfect balance of visual stimuli. It could be images, it could be video, and the auditory stimuli, what we are going to present. What we talk, how we present also matters. Thank you, and this is a small part of what backward design is.